The building smelled like motor oil and wet concrete, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed with the kind of hum that made you feel like you were standing inside something industrial, something that had never once been designed with human comfort in mind. Ava Merritt stood at the entrance of the Pendleton County Fleet Disposal Yard and did not move. She was 26 years old, 5'4" in her worn-out boots, and she was holding a manila envelope against her chest, the way someone holds a thing they cannot afford to lose. The envelope was thin. It contained 4 items: a letter on county letterhead, a photograph, a copy of a service record, and a cashier's check for $1,300, every dollar she had been able to put together in the 11 days since she'd seen the listing online. She had driven 4 hours to get here. Around her, men in Carhartt jackets and polo shirts with company logos moved in clusters toward the main lot. They had clipboards, they had tablets. 2 of them were on phones, already bidding remotely on something, their voices flat and transactional. A man in a yellow vest near the gate handed her a bidder's number without looking up. 31. She took it and tucked it under her arm. Inside the fence line, rows of decommissioned vehicles stretched under the gray November sky. Patrol cruisers with their livery half-stripped, evidence vans with the decals peeled, but the ghost of the county seal still visible on the door panels. A motorcycle with a bent front fork leaned against a chain-link separator. And at the far end of the lot, separated from everything else by a temporary barrier of orange construction fencing, there was a kennel unit. A black and tan Belgian Malinois sat inside it. He was not barking. He was not pacing. He was sitting perfectly still in the center of the kennel, his ears up, his amber eyes moving steadily across the yard, the way a soldier watches a perimeter, not in fear, but in habit. In duty, his muzzle was clean. His coat was intact. But there was a scar that ran from his left shoulder down across his ribcage, faded now, the fur grown back in a slightly different direction, like grass that had been bent by something heavy and never fully straightened. His name was Bravo. He had spent 4 years as a patrol and detection dog for the Pendleton County Sheriff's Department. Before that, 14 months assigned to a Special Operations Support Unit at Fort Bragg. He had cleared buildings and located IEDs, and held a bite on a fleeing suspect in the dark, while his handler had a broken collarbone and couldn't use his left arm. He had medals he would never know about, and commendations his handler had kept in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet, in a house in Fayetteville, North Carolina. His handler's name had been Staff Sergeant Daniel Merritt. Daniel Merritt had been Ava's father. He had been gone for 3 years. Ava did not walk toward the kennel, not yet. She found a spot near the edge of the lot where she could see it without being obvious, and she stood there and watched, and she thought about the last time she had seen Bravo, standing in the driveway of her grandmother's house, her father loading him into the back of the department's K9 transport unit, the dog sitting in the crate without complaint, watching Daniel through the grate with those amber eyes, as if to say, "I know, I'll wait." Her father had told her once that Bravo was the most disciplined animal he had ever worked with in 12 years of service. He had also told her that Bravo was the only partner he'd ever had who never once questioned an order, never flinched at the sound of a gun, and still somehow managed to look at Daniel like he was the most important thing in any room they ever walked into together. Ava had been jealous of that once, when she was younger and her father's deployments stretched on and she would go weeks without hearing his voice. She had resented the dog a little. Not seriously, not in the way that leaves marks, but in the small, quiet way that kids resent the things that take their parents away from them. She understood it differently now. The lot was filling up. She counted maybe 60 people in the immediate area, though the larger machinery and vehicle sections of the auction would draw most of them. 3 men she didn't recognize had gravitated toward the kennel barrier and were looking at Bravo the way people look at a used truck they're considering, with an appraising distance, a tallying of cost and utility. She heard one of them say, K9s are liability. Training's one thing, but you can't just throw a working dog into a civilian operation without a transition protocol. The other man said, "That dog's got more bite certifications than half my security team." The first man laughed. Ava looked down at the number in her hand. 31. A man in a white button-down shirt with a county ID clipped to his breast pocket walked to the front of the crowd and held up a handheld microphone that crackled when he tapped it. His name was Gordon Fay, and he ran fleet disposals for 3 counties, a fact Ava had learned from the website when she'd registered to bid. He had the practiced efficiency of someone who moved property for a living, and had long since stopped thinking about what the property had been before it came to him. "We'll start with the vehicle inventory," Gordon said, and move to specialty assets at 11. "That includes the K9 unit lot designation Sierra 7. Sierra 7. Bravo didn't move when the name was called over the PA. He didn't blink. He just kept watching the yard. The vehicle auction ran for an hour and 40 minutes. Ava stood in one spot for most of it. She bought a bottle of water from a vending machine near the lot's administrative trailer and drank half of it and poured the rest out on the concrete because she was too cold to finish it. She checked her phone twice. Her cousin had texted, "Did you get there okay?" She typed back yes and put the phone away. At 11:12, Gordon Fay walked to the orange construction barrier, and a handler appeared from a side gate, a young man, early 30s, in a department-issued jacket with PCSD on the back. He was holding a standard 6-foot lead. He entered the kennel through the gate and clipped the lead to Bravo's collar and led him out. Bravo walked out of the kennel with his head level and his shoulders square. He did not look at the crowd. The handler brought him to the center of the cleared space and stood to his side. Bravo sat without being told. The crowd, which had contracted around this end of the lot, went slightly quieter. Not silent, but quieter. The way people go quiet when something in front of them demands a certain kind of attention. Gordon Fay began his introduction. He talked about Bravo's certifications, narcotics detection, apprehension, patrol. He talked about his service record with the department and his prior assignment with a federal support contract. He mentioned the dog's age, 7 years, and said, as if reciting from a clipboard, that the animal had been cleared for private placement by the department's veterinary officer and was physically sound. "Starting bid is $1,500, Gordon said. A man near the front raised his paddle immediately. 2,000 came from the left side, 25 from the right. Ava raised her number. 3,000 from bidder 31, Gordon said, not looking at her. 3,200 from the left. 35 from a man in a fleece vest near the back who hadn't been visible until now. She raised her number again. 36, she said, and her voice was steady, and she was surprised by that. The man in the fleece vest looked at her for the first time. 38, he said. 4,000, said the man on the left. Ava's stomach dropped. She had $3,400. The cashier's check in her envelope said $3,400. She had $47 in her checking account and a gas tank that was a quarter full, and she had driven 4 hours because she had seen a county asset listing that said K9, Belgian Malinois, male, 7 years, lot Sierra 7, and she had known. Without calling, without confirming, without any evidence beyond the name of the county and the description, that it was him. She lowered her number. The man on the left got the next bid in. The man in the fleece vest went to 42. A new voice from somewhere behind her said 4,400. Gordon looked at Ava, not unkindly, but with the flat professionalism of someone running a transaction. Bravo had not moved. He was still sitting. His eyes moved across the crowd and landed briefly on Ava, and then moved on. He didn't know her. He had met her twice, maybe 3 times. She had been 22 the last time she'd seen him, standing in her grandmother's driveway. She had scratched behind his ears, and he had tolerated it with the polite dignity of a dog who had things to do. She looked at the handler. He was watching the crowd, keeping the lead loose, his expression professionally neutral. But when the bidding pushed past 4,000 and Ava had lowered her number, she saw something cross his face. Just for a second, the way weather crosses an open field. Not quite recognition, but something adjacent to it. She walked toward him. The handler's name was Deputy Caleb Marsh, though she didn't know that yet. He was 31, had been with the K9 unit for 2 years, and had been Bravo's handler for the last 14 months after Bravo was transferred from Fort Bragg. He had been told, in the brief and practical way these things are communicated in law enforcement, that Bravo's original handler had been killed in a vehicle accident during a training exercise in 2021. He had been told the dog had performed correctly and professionally through the entire transition. He had been told this in the same tone one might use to describe a piece of equipment that had survived a stress test. Ava reached the edge of the barrier and stopped. "Excuse me," she said, quietly enough that Gordon's microphone wouldn't catch it. "Can I ask you something?" Deputy Marsh looked at her sideways. The bidding was still going. Someone had just pushed it to 4,700. "He was my father's dog," she said, "before he came to the department. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Merritt. Fort Bragg, he died 3 years ago." Deputy Marsh didn't say anything for a moment. "I know who he was," he said. That was not what she expected. She waited. "Bravo came to us with his file," Deputy Marsh said, keeping his voice low. "It's not standard. Usually we get the training records and the medical history, and that's it. But whoever processed him out of Bragg included the full handler history. There was a photograph." He paused. "Your father and this dog, somewhere in the field. I couldn't tell you where." Ava felt something shift behind her sternum. Not grief, exactly. Something older than grief. "I've been trying to find him for 2 years," she said. "After my dad died. The department. The army, I mean. They said he'd been transferred, but they couldn't tell me to where. Privacy protocols. And then I found the listing last week. The bidding had stalled at 4,900. Gordon was doing the slow count." "I only have 3,400, Ava said. Deputy Marsh looked at the ground. Then he looked at Bravo. Bravo was watching the sky. "There's nothing I can do about the auction," Deputy Marsh said. "I don't have authority here." "I know," she said. "Going once," Gordon said. Ava turned back toward the crowd. The man in the fleece vest had his paddle up. He was talking to someone beside him, already moving on, already mentally computing the next thing. "Going twice." She opened the manila envelope. She pulled out the photograph. It was a worn 4x6 print, the kind you get from a drugstore counter, the color slightly oversaturated because it had been taken on her father's phone, and printed twice because the first print got water damaged. In it, Daniel Merritt was crouched in desert kit, his body armor over his shoulder, because it was between operations, his hand resting flat on Bravo's back. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at something to the left, something off frame, and her father was smiling slightly, not a performed smile, a private one, the kind you don't make for cameras. Bravo's ears were up, his body was at rest. He was leaning, just barely, into Daniel's hand. She held the photograph up without thinking, not to show anyone, not as a performance, just because she needed to hold it. And Bravo turned his head. He had been watching the sky, and then he turned his head and looked directly at the photograph in her hand. His body didn't move, his ears went forward. His amber eyes locked on the image, and every muscle in his frame went absolutely still in the way that working dogs go still when they've located something. Not alert, not aggressive, but found. Settled. Like a compass needle swinging north. The handler felt the lead go slack. Gordon said, "Sold. Wait." The voice came from the left side of the crowd. A woman's voice, firm and unhurried. Ava turned. A woman in her late 50s with a sheriff's department badge on a lanyard around her neck was walking forward from behind the row of spectators. She was not tall, but she moved with the kind of deliberate authority that cleared space without asking. Her name was Chief Evelyn Pruett, and she was the K9 unit commander for Pendleton County Sheriff's Department, and she had been standing at the back of the crowd for the last 20 minutes in civilian clothes, because she had driven here on her day off. Gordon Fay blinked. "Chief Pruitt." "Gordon," she said, and her tone was not unkind, but it was also not negotiable. "Give me 2 minutes." She walked past the barrier to where Deputy Marsh and Ava were standing, and she looked at Ava, and then she looked at the photograph still in Ava's hand, and she was quiet for a moment. "Daniel Merritt's daughter," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I knew your father," Chief Pruitt said. "Not well, but I knew him. He consulted on our unit's transition protocol when Bravo was transferred from Bragg, 3 or 4 phone calls." She paused. "He was very specific about what Bravo needed. Temperature, routine, the kind of handler who wouldn't try to undo 4 years of muscle memory just to make the dog fit a new system." She looked at Marsh. "That's why I chose this one." Deputy Marsh said nothing. "Your father asked me one thing," Chief Pruitt said to Ava. "He asked me that if something ever happened to him, and Bravo was eventually retired, that we'd find a way to get the dog home." She looked at the envelope in Ava's hand. "I expected that call to come from next of kin. I didn't expect it to take 3 years. I didn't know where he was," Ava said. "I only found the listing." "I know," Chief Pruitt said. "The listing shouldn't have been public. That's a paperwork failure on our end, and I intend to deal with it." She turned back Gordon Fay, who had been waiting with the patience of someone who understood instinctively that the auction was no longer in his hands. "Withdraw Sierra 7 from the lot," she said. "Chief, the county protocol for asset disposal." "I'm aware of the protocol, Gordon. And I'm telling you that I am exercising administrative authority over the placement of this animal based on a prior handler agreement documented in the original transfer file. If you'd like, we can spend the next 4 to 6 weeks running that through county legal, or you can withdraw the lot this morning, and I will submit the paperwork by end of day." Gordon looked at her. He looked at his clipboard. He clicked his microphone. "Sierra 7 is withdrawn from today's lot," he said. "We'll proceed with lot Sierra 8. The crowd dispersed the way crowds do, not all at once, but in clumps, people already scrolling their phones, already recalculating the day. The man in the fleece vest looked over once, and then turned and walked away. Ava did not move. Chief Pruitt nodded once at Marsh, and the deputy walked Bravo to where Ava was standing and stopped. Bravo sat. He looked up at her. Up close, he was bigger than she remembered. 7 years had taken nothing from him in the way they take things from some dogs. No clouding in the eyes, no stiffness in the way he held himself. He was still entirely himself. Still the dog her father had described on those phone calls during his last deployment. The calls where her father's voice was tired, but his words were careful and precise, the way they always were when he was talking about something that mattered. "He's got better instincts than most of the men I've worked with," her father had told her. "Don't tell them I said that." Ava crouched down. She was not sure what she expected. She had told herself, on the drive here, that she was not expecting anything. She had told herself she was just trying to fulfill a responsibility. She had told herself she was doing this for her father, not for herself, and she had mostly believed it. She held out her hand. Bravo leaned forward and pressed his nose to her palm, slow and deliberate, the way he had assessed every unfamiliar thing in his life, not cautiously but carefully, the way a professional handles something valuable. He exhaled, and then he pressed the full side of his face into her open hand. Not hard, not desperate, just there, like a door closing, like a sentence ending. Ava did not cry there in the middle of the Pendleton County Fleet Disposal Yard, with Gordon Fay still standing 20 feet away and the fluorescents buzzing overhead and the smell of motor oil in the cold air. She held it together the way her father had always held things together in public, the particular Merritt way of keeping your face neutral and letting the feeling live somewhere below the visible. She cried in the car. 40 minutes later, when she'd finished the paperwork in the administrative trailer and loaded Bravo into the back seat and driven out of the lot and merged onto the highway, and she was far enough away that the only witness was him. sitting in the back seat with his ears up and his eyes on the side of her face. And she cried the way she hadn't cried since the phone call 3 years ago. Bravo did not try to fix it. He didn't paw at the seat or whine or push his way forward. He sat in the back seat with the patience of an animal that had lived through things it didn't have words for, and had learned, somewhere along the way, that the people he loved sometimes needed to fall apart for a while, before they could be okay. He had learned that from her father. They drove north through the hills as the light shifted, the grey morning, pulling slowly toward the pale gold of a November afternoon. Ava drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting at her side, and at some point, she couldn't say exactly when, she felt the warmth of Bravo's chin come to rest on her shoulder from the back seat, heavy and steady, the way a hand rests on a shoulder when someone is trying to tell you, "I'm still here. We're still here." Chief Pruett had said, before Ava left, that she would send over Bravo's full medical file and a transition guide that Deputy Marsh had put together. She had also said, with a matter-of-factness that Ava had needed more than any comfort, "That dog has been waiting to go home. Some part of him has always known where home was." Ava hadn't been able to answer that. She just nodded. But driving north, with Bravo's weight warm against her shoulder, and the highway unspooling ahead of her, and her father's photograph tucked back into the envelope on the passenger seat, she thought about what Chief Pruett had said. About waiting, about knowing. She thought about the moment Bravo had turned his head and looked at the photograph. She thought about how it had happened in the space of 1 second. No hesitation, no process, no visible deliberation. One moment he was watching the sky, and the next moment he was looking, fully and completely, at the image of the man who had trained him and loved him and then left, not searching, not uncertain, recognized. She thought about her father's voice on those phone calls, the tiredness in it and the care in it, and the particular way he had of describing Bravo, not like a tool, not even quite like a pet, but like a partner, like someone you trust with your life, and who trusts you with theirs, and who you know, with a certainty that needs no explanation, is going to be there when it matters. Her father had understood something about loyalty that most people spend their whole lives reaching toward and never quite touching. He had understood it from his years of service, and from his unit, and from the men and women he'd gone through things with that couldn't be put into civilian language. But he had also understood it from Bravo, from 7 years with an animal who did not perform loyalty, who did not learn it as a concept, but who simply was it, all the way down, in every moment, without any awareness that it was remarkable. Ava had her father's eyes. She had his chin and his stubbornness and his particular inability to leave things unfinished, which was why she had called 16 different government offices over 2 years, trying to find one Belgian Malinois in the county system, and why she had driven 4 hours on a Tuesday morning with a cashier's check that wasn't enough, because the alternative was not going. The road curved and the hills flattened and the sky opened up to the wide pale blue of a November afternoon, and Bravo shifted his weight in the back seat and sighed, a long, slow exhalation that sounded less like a dog settling and more like something being set down, something heavy that had been carried a long way. She reached back and rested her hand on his head briefly, the way her father used to, and then put it back on the wheel. Neither of them had anything left to look for. They were already home.